I know a few good stories. They take place in a corner of America that might seem familiar, yet still manages to surprise. The settings are spectacular, the characters compelling, the action exciting, the plot lines unpredictable. I'm Tom Richardson. Join me as I explore New England's great outdoors, from Candlewood Lake, Connecticut to Caribou, Maine, from the beaches of Cape Cod to the peaks of New Hampshire's White Mountains. The stories are waiting. Let's live them on Explore New England. Explore New England is presented by your New England Ford dealers, your local REI co-op. REI believes a life outside is fundamental to a life well lived. Campers Inn RV and visitnewengland.com. The southern coast of Maine is long and varied and full of remarkable places to explore. Less than 2 hours from Boston, you'll find long surf-washed beaches, coastal woodlands, and marsh-lined estuaries in a part of Maine that's perhaps best known as the cherished summer retreat of a certain former president. Among anglers, however, coastal Maine remains somewhat of an undiscovered gem. Other parts of the state get a lot more attention, especially when it comes to Maine's storied freshwater action with brook trout, landlocked salmon, lake trout, and smallmouth bass. Yet here on the southern coast, the angler has a good chance of connecting with striped bass ranging from schoolies all the way north to 40-pounders. That's the wonderful thing about stripers, of course. You never know where you'll find them or how big they might be when you do. One person who can vouch for this is Mike Baker of Kayak Fish New England, who was kind enough to show me some of his favorite striper spots on the Mousam River in Kennebunk. I met Mike at the small launch ramp off Western Avenue in early October to see if any late-season school bass might still be lingering in the nearshore waters before making their exodus to point south. So Mike, tell me, where are we right now on the Mousam?
We are in Kennebunk, Maine, Route 9. Little boat ramp here off of just upriver from the mouth. Mousam River.
And what's the plan this morning?
Head upriver and see what we can see for some wildlife and hopefully find some striped bass. It's starting to slow down.
Yep.
The river goes up almost 2 miles, all the way up to Route 1, Kennebunk, Rogers Pond. Then it becomes tidal and you can't go any further with the kayaks because it actually starts to climb and you'll have, rapids.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
It's cool.
So you have a striped bass come all the way up to that point?
Yeah, they'll go to the dam. Chase the herring in the spring, fall back out when the herring do, and then in the fall when the bait's back in the river, so are they.
When do the stripers first arrive on the Mousam River?
Second week in May. Average time. It'll vary. We'll have a few holdovers, I think, that stay year round, but they're schooling up, chasing the bait, where throughout the summer, I think that you could find them anywhere throughout the river or anywhere out front. They're kind of scattered. Now, this time of year, they're schooling up, finding the bait, and they're moving. So you could have a hot morning out here one morning, and then the next day you come back and it's a ghost town.
Well, let's go. Let's stop wasting time and with me yakking, and let's go.
Let's go check it out.
Try to catch some fish.
Sounds good.
After launching, Mike and I paddled upriver to take advantage of high tide. The water levels in the Mousam drop rapidly once the tide starts to ebb, so anglers should plan to fish the upstream areas at high water and work their way toward the mouth as the tide drops. Stripers in the Mousam can be caught using a variety of techniques and lures, but if you're new to the area or trying to find a concentration of fish, it's hard to beat trolling a tube and worm combo. Mike slow trolls his tubes primarily to locate fish in the river, although there are definitely some nuances to scoring consistently with them.
A little red surgical tube. Imitates a sea worm going through the water, so we'll troll these at about 1.5 to 2 miles an hour with the current if possible. And it's lights out. It's the easiest way to get striped bass on the kayak. Perfect for beginners. You put it in the rod holder and just paddle along. If you can paddle, you can catch fish.
A wide variety of other lures, from poppers to soft plastic swim shads, will also fool fish in the Mousam. The river is also popular among fly fishermen, who can fish from kayaks as well as the riverbanks. The preferred strategy is to imitate the prevailing forage, which can range from herring to sand eels, depending on time of year. While the entire tidal portion of the Mousam can hold stripers, many anglers prefer to fish the river mouth, which can be accessed by kayak or the Parsons Beach parking area. Shore fishing can yield some very large fish, especially during the migratory periods and after dark.
What I like about kayak fishing is you can get away from the crowds. You can hit spots that aren't accessible from shore. A lot of the spots that we hit today, you're not going to get to from shore. You're not going to get to from a motorboat due to lack of water. I find fishing from a kayak a lot more enjoyable, a lot more challenging, whole different connection. It's 100% more personable. You know, it's just, there's something about it.
While the tidal portion of the Mousam appears fairly pristine, at least to the casual observer, the river as a whole faces environmental challenges. For example, the upper half of the river has been altered by 4 dams, the first constructed in the mid-1800s. Unfortunately, those early dam builders gave little thought as to how species of anadromous and catadromous fish, namely shad, river herring, and eels, would be able to make their way up and downstream to their spawning and nursery areas. It's a problem that exists to this day.
Up until the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, there was an amazing amount of unfortunate pollution that flowed downstream. People really didn't think about the fact that they would throw anything into a river and it would stay there, or it would have a terrible effect on the plants and animals that should have been living in, on, and around a river. So there have been many efforts over the years to improve the health of our rivers by reducing pollution. And so that has made a huge difference and improved the water quality of our rivers a lot. However, one of the areas where we are finding there are still problems relate to old dams and the lack of fish passage. Mousam River has many beautiful areas along it. It's not a long river, it's fairly short. There are some just beautiful places to explore. However, to my knowledge, the Mousam River is the largest river system in Maine with no form of fish passage whatsoever. We know that there were large runs of native migratory fish. Some of those fish still come back. They have fascinating life histories, and some of these fish are still coming back to the Mousam River, even though they can't get past the first dam, which is right in the middle of Kennebunk. So it's a really difficult situation. Things are certainly better than they were 50 years ago, but there's a lot of potential for improving the health of the river by removing obsolete dams and bringing back some of these native migratory fish species. Just because a river doesn't have obvious signs of pollution, just because it doesn't have piles of dead fish and oil scum, doesn't mean it's actually all that healthy. That the next realm of improving the health of rivers is to bring back the fish. We've gotten rid of the obvious, nasty, terrible pollution that's occurred, but we can't have silent rivers. Rivers deserve to have their native fish populations so that they are a part of the ecology of the landscape, so the birds can come back, so people can enjoy them fishing. So these are sometimes difficult conversations to ask people to look at their river and kind of think about it with new eyes.
The coastal wetlands of southern Maine are not only beautiful, they are critically important to the ecology of the region. which is a major reason the writer Rachel Carson, widely considered the founder of the modern environmental movement, chose to settle in the area. Through her writings, Carson championed the protection of our planet's natural resources, and one only need visit the sprawling National Wildlife Refuge that bears her name to appreciate her motivation. Biologist Sarah Dodgen worked at the refuge for several years and knows it well. She was kind enough to give me a tour of the Carson Interpretive Trail at the refuge's headquarters in Wells.
So, the Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge stretches from Kittery, Maine, all the way up to Cape Elizabeth, Maine. That's about 50 miles along the coast. It was named after Rachel Carson in 1970. This was our 50th anniversary this past year. There's so much variety at the refuge. Like I said, it spans over 50 miles, so we have beaches, we have dunes, we have the marshes, the upland forests. There's just a little bit of everything that you can see at the refuge, and we have wonderful conserved tracts of land that we have some trails on, and you can go walk in the woods, and you need a break from staring at the computer screen for a little while. So it's really a perfect place to work and live around here.
Wow, look at this view. Sarah, this is fantastic.
Yeah, it's incredible. This is one of my favorite platforms on the trails. Yeah.
Oh man. So what is this tidal creek or estuary right here?
So this is the little river. It flows through our marshes, and then you get out into a portion of the creek where it starts to widen and it meets the ocean, which you can see a little bit further past the tidal flats.
The viewing platforms along the interpretive trail afford sweeping views of the surrounding wetlands and the chance to see numerous bird species, including a variety of ducks, blue and white heron, egrets, least terns, kingfishers, osprey, and, if you're lucky, bald eagles and the elusive salt marsh sparrow.
So have you heard of creeping wintergreen before?
I have not heard of creeping wintergreen, but I have a feeling I'm going to learn something
Yes,
about
you
it
are.
though.
So it's a really common cover herbaceous plant in the forest like this. It's an upland plant. And if you crush the leaves, it's really kind of crunchy like a holly leaf. But if you crush it up and bring it to your nose, it has a really strong spearmint
Oh my gosh,
smell.
yeah. Oh, it smells great.
I love it. It's very refreshing.
After our hike along the mile-long Carson Trail, Sarah and I launched a pair of kayaks on the upper Webhonet estuary, also in Wells, and home to numerous species of wading birds, as well as the rare salt marsh and Lincoln's sparrows.
So Sarah, what part of the refuge are we in right now?
So this is called the Bourne Marsh. We have several salt marsh units along the coast from Kittery to Cape Elizabeth. The refuge owns about 15,000 acres of land, and this is one of our salt marsh units. Right now we're in the Bourne Marsh.
Okay, great. And the tide is ripping in right now, I can see.
Tide's ripping in. We're probably a foot away from high tide right now. You can see the marks on the Spartina alterniflora.
So you mentioned that, global warming and sea level rise is a problem for species like salt marsh sparrows. But is it also causing, these dead trees that I see along the edge of the marsh, by the forest?
Yeah, that's a good observation. So they do kind of tend to stand out from the rest of the trees that are behind them that are green and alive and going through their natural cycles of turning orange during the fall like it is now. But all of these trees are dead that are kind of white and gray. They're essentially ghost forests is what we've been calling them.
Ghost
yeah,
forest. Sounds pretty eerie.
Yes, it's very eerie. Yeah, it's kind of a new term that's developed in the last decade or so. But the trees that grow up to the salt marsh edge are now threatened by the increased level of salt water that intrudes up into the upland. So it's like breaking the barrier between where the salt marsh stops and where the upland forest starts. These trees are not able to tolerate the amount of salt water that they're now taking up, so they end up dying.
Right, and it probably doesn't take a lot to, push them over the edge, right?
Yeah, not at all. They're really living life right on the edge here, so it's a very narrow window where these trees can actually survive. I think I first developed my love of nature and the outdoors by just hanging out with my dad, because he lives out in the country in Washington State, and we would always go camping in the summertime, and I was always exposed to different areas to play in, whether it was playing in the river, hanging out with the cows in the pasture. I think I was just always drawn to animals to begin with.
If you only know coastal Maine for its seafood restaurants, lighthouses, lobster boats, and tourist shops, you might be surprised to learn that it boasts a thriving surfing scene, one that locals enjoy year-round. The southern portion of the state's shoreline in particular offers gently sloping beaches and underwater structure, not to mention exposure to the open Atlantic, that combine to produce dependable swells and breaks. It was here in the 1960s that Tomas Wiley began his surfing career. Now at 78, the man widely considered to be the godfather of Maine surfing is still going strong.
Nobody really surfed in the winters in the 60s. They surfed in the summers. I actually started surfing when I came back from my freshman year of college. So that was in 1964. Following winter, 65, I came back for Christmas vacation. For some reason, I kind of wanted to get to the ocean and look at the ocean and see what it was like. So I went down on the first trip and I saw waves there. Actually, they were pretty good, but there was nothing I could do about it. So I went and I found some gear, the old beaver tail 1/4-inch dive suit with the bottom piece too that went up to under your shoulders. And then I had to figure out, well, what am I going to do for my hands and feet? I figured out I got oversized, like Playtex was the gloves back then. Playtex gloves. I got wool socks, and I actually got a pair of oversized sneakers that I was going to wear to have. We waited for a storm, and then took the board, went out, and it was quite a rude awakening, though. That was probably the first time I realized what hypothermia was. I got a couple of waves. The first time I caught a wave, I was hooked, and I knew it. Yeah, and that was the beginning of that. Well, it became sort of an obsession. as I get older, I find not just physically, but mentally and spiritually too, there are challenges. And sometimes all those things can work together or individually bring you down to a point where you question even if it's worth it to continue on. And surfing, your surfing gradually diminishes, but I don't go old gracefully, let's put it that way. You have to make decisions, you have to change. That's the whole point. Or you're not going anywhere. You have to make changes across the board, and so that you can overcome, or at least lengthen your lifespan in the ocean and surfing, or otherwise you're not going to be able to do it. I know I have to, at my age, I know I have to continue on this path. Just don't stop either. You know, you can't play around with it. You can't go idle, in other words. It doesn't stop until the day you die. Whenever it happens, it's just, it's got to be that way. Especially if you're going to be able to stay in the water and be connected and be fulfilled. I only have so much time, and as I grow older, I realize that the connection spiritually is the ultimate experience in surfing. For me, I can't speak for anybody else, but you take only some things with you when you go, and that is a compilation of all the joy and experiences and love that you have. Love is the only thing. You're not going to take anything else. When my time is up, actually I'll be taking all this surfing with me into heaven.